Hello and welcome to our unusual stories, not so much anymore, I guess, but WS podcast these days. This is one of those episodes that will introduce and explain why the change and what this change means ultimately. My name is Wojciech Salski. I'll be your host for today. We have Trenton with us.
Hello.
Yet again, this time for the first time on camera. So, that's one thing. You've already heard Trenton at least twice on the podcast, and now we're actually doing it with a camera. We have a nice setup at his place, so that's wonderful. I hope you appreciate the space. I do.
Yeah.
In terms of the housekeeping to begin with, this episode will be a bit different than others. It will be more conversational than what you're used to maybe. I will remind you, if you're new to the show, please make sure to follow or subscribe whatever platform you're on. It just helps the podcast grow, and it allows you to see the show coming up instead of listening to it once and then forgetting all about it. If you find it useful and entertaining, please do so. Other than that, we'll have a few topics today to cover. I think we'll kick it off by basically kind of maybe giving a little thought of our own on what branding is, how we see it. And then we'll talk you through the idea, why the rebrand, what does it mean for the show. Trenton, who's the creator behind the logo, will offer us some insight from the industry. And ultimately, I don't know, let's see where this adventure takes us.
Right? Yeah, let's see where it goes. We'll just chat away and
we've got the coffee, we've got water, so we're good to go. So yeah, guys, I guess I'll start just by we were talking before the show about this idea, what branding means to us, and what pops up for me again and again, and I did study it to an extent at uni, but what pops up for me is this like recognition, being either recognizing something to be of value because of the brand, or the brand meaning something for me, which is why I want to associate myself with it. Like, for example, Adidas or Nike, the first thought that comes into my mind is like, you're a sporty person.
Yeah.
You're an athlete.
Yeah.
But for a show also, right? Like, what is this show? Ultimately, it's not about the brand, but the brand should be about the show to a degree, right?
Yeah, it's like a whole world around like the it's like, what is a brand? Because it's not just like one specific thing, right? It's like it's this outer shell that encapsulates every part of what it is that you do. Like Nike, it's like, oh yeah, it's a sporty person.
Yeah.
And what constitutes a sporty person? You think, oh yeah, they wear like sporty shoes, or they wear their like goggles, or they have like a sporty watch. And it's like, for Nike in particular, it's like these products. And for you in this instance of the podcast as well, it's I feel like it's a deep reflection of you. And because you're the whole idea is that it's your creative work, so there's a very particular brand, so it's this umbrella that covers all the sorts of things that you do.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So I don't know if maybe just for context, right? In terms of and we'll maybe dive deeper into that at some point, but in terms of what Trenton has done for me is by taking your outlook on what I've offered, you've offered some solutions onto how to basically align, create, and overall develop, I guess, a brand for the show, but not only, right? So in the context of the show, maybe a little, insight, fun fact for both Trenton and yourself, guys, is the first time the podcast started, it was simply at some point in COVID time, I bought myself a microphone. The initial thought was like, my friend told me that all the stories that I write and all the poems that I write, people don't really read, and they won't. The blogging era is gone, or is not maybe as as popular as it used to be. Everyone wants to have everything on on sound or screen. And my friend Anthony suggested that I just buy a microphone and I record audible versions of these monologues or stories or poems. And I did that. I started a little, I guess, blog posts on Instagram. And then since I had the microphone and I had a lot of time with myself because it was COVID and I was living alone, I just ended up one day setting up the microphone and just started talking to it. I decided I'll read the story and I'll give a little thought about it. I played around with editing, and then I had to come up with the name, and I had to come up with the thumbnail, right?
Yep.
The logo. And I basically just scrolled through my photos on my phone and found this photo we did on like 2 years earlier at one of my experimental camera workshop thing, when the girls painted me in like fluorescent paint colors, and basically just took kind of dark pictures with that. And I was like, that's cool. And it's not just my face.
It's visually appealing, it was a cool, it's definitely like it's a fun look as well.
And the shirt again, the that's another kind of worms, but like it all aligned in a sense that I basically chose this random photo, made it into the thumbnail, and the name of the stories was like, well, they are usual stories, but they are also unusual in them being usual, right? Because we're all very different, and that's the way I started. And it's both my first book and the show itself. The idea behind it was like, it's a usual, unusual, and usually unusually usual.
The whole sort of development of your, I guess perhaps like your brand initially, it was very organic, which I think a lot of like companies or like it sort of naturally grows. They're like, oh, I want to do this thing. You're like, and for you it was that naturally great. And then it was like, oh, well, I want to put this out to the world, but people need to be able to identify that with me. What is that connection? How do we make that? So in the first instance, you were like, oh, I had to come up with a name. It's like, oh yeah, now of course, like there has to be a thumbnail. What's that going to look like? What elements do I put together? And these are a lot of things, like when you're thrown into this world, you're like, well, I have no idea. Like, what does it? And then you look up what other people's look like, or you just gained, like, you used assets from like that photo from a while ago because you were like, oh, that, I feel like that
not caring about the quality of it as well.
Well, well, you cared obviously, and you care about quality, but in different areas. You know? So like you care about the quality, like you want to get a good microphone, so because you knew that you would be speaking to it, and your words were the sort of priority for you. But then actually, like the association with, or the visual style of it, perhaps, was just like that was like the second thought, which, for most people, that should usually be like good businesses and such. It doesn't matter what like the logo is. It's like if the stuff that you put out is that good, are the words meaningful, and for you in that case, it's yes. Like that's the this podcast has been going for a long time, and it's as you say as well. Like it's, I think you can get a lot out of the words you say.
Yeah.
And like every time for me, I love talking to you. I feel like there's always very interesting conversations to be had, and I think this podcast has been a perfect vessel for you as well. And
just
now
to spew out.
But now we're at the point where your podcast and sort of the stuff you're doing. You've now you've published your second book and written your second book, and it's not, from what I gather, it's not going to be the last one. So this is growing and it's developing, and you're now at the point where you're like, okay, well, now I feel like there needs to be something. The visual side of it needs to match sort of the work that I'm putting in and the audiences I want to reach. That and the sort of the being able to sort of the name as well. You want that to be sort of more not approachable, but like
easier to find.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh no, you're so right. And maybe one thing for context as well, guys, because I wanted to basically advertise myself on LinkedIn in particular, as a writing professional, and I did work as a journalist for some time, I created this idea with a little logo as well, created, and I think in like Canva or something like that, called
No hate to Canva, by the way.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
it's great for people who have no idea and they just like throw some stuff together.
Yeah. No,
Good
fair
starting
play,
point.
especially for a starter like myself.
Yeah.
W. Salsky Creative Works, and that was the overall sort of umbrella, as Trenton pointed out earlier, which was incorporated into this project as yet again the overall brand, while the podcast, WS Podcast, can be the one of the subsidiary.
Yeah.
And then obviously over time there might be some other things that pop up, which is, it's also so empowering. But something you just said is this is so resonating with me, is like, you know, logos aside, if you have any business idea, whatever concept thing you're doing, and that thing is not really up to par, there is no point in you spending money or time on creating an amazing logo. Like, you should probably not start your journey with a podcast by creating a logo, not ever recording an episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can spend all the time in the world making it look nice, but unless the thing you're actually doing is like good, then it's not. Yeah, it's like, okay.
It's like packaging.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like you can sell it.
Yeah, I guess the invitation here for you guys, and that's also one of the thoughts why I wanted to make this particular episode, is not only to share, you know, our story, my story, and this adventure, but also to give you some pointers and ideas on how you can, whether it's in podcast or, you know, whatever other shape or form, how you would want to start your own brand, right? The one thing, and this is something that I'd like you to talk a little bit about, is, you know, I've noticed, and I think I've even shared this with you before. I've heard recently this idea that nowadays we're not actually anymore in the era of brands as impersonal brands, rather because of social media in particular. In a way, very early on, you are creating your own brand, and especially with LinkedIn being the, you know, the career, the professional brand, and then with Instagram being this, you know, beautifully looking, obviously fake in many ways, but like you're selling yourself to the world, right?
It's more focused on like the, you know, visual aspect, because you go on Instagram, the first thing you see is like a square with a photo in it. So that's obviously, and then the caption's the second thing. Because at the end of the day, it's, in terms of like social medias and stuff, they kind of all are the same thing.
Yeah.
But they're just appeal to different people, and it's like, oh, how are they laid out? And it's like, oh yeah, where's the focus drawn to? And that's the massive thing. You see, for like LinkedIn, that appeals more to professionals because there's more like, you know, it's called connections instead of friends. But you can still like talk to them, and you can still repost things. And like, and Facebook, you know, there's you could draw hundreds of similarities between these social medias.
And you are basically, I mean, I guess the point that I've heard someone say was that you are ultimately, because of the world we live in right now with all these social media, unless you want to completely cut yourself off of them, you are ultimately, there is a brand to you already.
Yeah.
Now, you, even my dear listener, even though you might not be consciously doing it, there is some brand to you, unless you have no accounts whatsoever anywhere in those, you know, websites we've shared, which is so. I think this is particularly resonant to this show, because, you know, this is not a show about me, but because I'm the host, and I'm the main sort of, I guess, the main dish, unless you're, you know, you're pretending you're listening to someone else, which just, I mean, fair enough. That's
sure, that's getting a bit deep,
yeah. Then
like a vessel for like the sort of the world that you've taken in and then sort of putting out, you know.
Yeah. So in a way, a vessel or a mechanism, some sort of a host, right? Like, I'm hosting this show.
Yeah. So
I've noticed, and this was the idea behind the new logo, the new thumbnail, is like, I've noticed majority of podcasts that I'm listening to that have one or two hosts that stay with the show. At this point, majority of them, if not all, have that host incorporated into the thumbnail, which is interesting, right? Because I did not, if you think about things, maybe, things like products like Nike or McDonald's, even though you might have an odd hero or, someone really famous advertising it,
Yeah.
because ultimately it's about the thing or about the feeling and not about the person giving you that.
That's it, yeah.
They don't have those incorporated. And now I'm like, well, on one hand, I feel really awkward putting my face out there even more so, but at the same time, it kind of feels fair to the listener and to whoever encounters the show for them to know who's the host of it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of this, the brand is me in a way.
It's instantly, exactly, as you said, you're the host of this show, so of course it completely makes sense that when people are coming to find it, they see you, that your name is also a part of that, which I think we should touch base with, because previously it was, with Unusual Stories, that was like, sort of an echo of, your the way you saw the stories you were putting out and the way you were writing and such. Whereas now, and it was also interesting because there's something as well with your name that you've changed in terms of the branding, because before it was like your full name, which Wojciech Salski, for a lot of people, and I'm not gonna lie, I mean, I've known you for a while, but when I was writing your name the first time, I was like doing the read, I was like, how do I spell Wojciech? I was like because obviously being from Poland as well, like there's it's different like spelling and such, and it's and different pronunciations. And so even I was having a couple moments where I was like, okay, yeah, write your name. And then I think it was about halfway through the process you came to me like, oh, I've had some like conversations, and actually we were thinking about going in this direction and actually shortening it down to Woj Salski. And it's funny because actually yesterday I bumped into a friend of yours who, where like for your birthday, I'd met one of your friends, and because I've known you as Wojtek for the whole time, for however many years we've known each other, and this guy comes up to me and says, I recognize you, were you at Woj's party? And I was like, first I was like, well, yeah, I know who Woj is, but it's funny because there's like almost like a new generation of people that are now knowing you as Woj, because it's like, it's short, it's easier to say, and it's like convenient, and it's,
It's the way the Brits named me, right? Like it's so funny.
The Brits brand you already.
Like truly, when I was at uni, at working at the university, that just came up again and again, being like an easier way, and because it's so prevalent in the English speaking culture, English speaking nationalities and stuff, to have a short nickname alternative, whereas in Polish in general you have the formal and informal, right? So you have Wojciech, which is formal, and Wojtek, which is informal, but not necessarily the short. But since what people struggle with my name is how to pronounce J and how to pronounce W, by shortening the other part and just giving Woj, it's obviously VOJ. Someone would
word
phonetically call it.
Phonetically, that was the word I was looking for, because it's like because Wojtek, even though I'm used to saying Wojtek, it's still a W, as you say. So it's like Woj. It's like, oh, people just say like it's phonetical. And it's also because you won't be, as we were talking about, like the fact that we're saying in terms of the thumbnail, your face was on that, so it's easily identifiable. But we're also wanting to incorporate your name was also a part of that. Right, because you are the host. This is your show. You're sort of, for a lot of the episodes, you're either like, it's your interpretation of books and sort of the like and such like that. So
it's an important part for sure, and the point for the listeners and for audience in general was like, let's I think one of my friends pointed out that it will be easier for people to recognize if it's easier in spelling, because especially if you're a foreigner, as I once was in general in terms of my language abilities, it can be daunting or sort of disheartening to encounter a name you cannot pronounce, and that can actually stop you, and you will not listen to the episode, which I would make a cautious bet that in the multitudes of the universes there is one person at least who had that experience when they see the show and it's like some, for example, for me, Greek names are really, really difficult to figure out. And it's like, just because I have no clue whatsoever how to even pronounce that word, I'll probably skip and find another show that is a bit more appealing.
Easier. Exactly,
you know?
yeah.
Maybe
it's like
because-
approachable, you know, when it's shorter. And if you have like this super long name, you're like, even though like, you know, we're in the day and age, I feel like, you know, our cultures are like, it's in some instances becoming more open. In some instances they're closing off a bit more, but
it's in flux
thing.
constantly.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, we definitely like, you might find that if you used like your full name, that your Polish audience might be more drawn towards, or like they might be easier for them to like go in and be like, oh yeah, but for like people in the UK, it might be like, you see a Polish name, you're like, well, is that instinctively you're like, oh, it's going to be in Polish, or like it'd be in like
exactly,
like less sort of, yeah, like you might have less connections or reason to go listen to that show if it's like not like just a like a, you know,
in a way, I think also, as you said, it's like I'm kind of tricking the, you know, in goodwill, but I'm kind of tricking those that are reluctant to open their heads to a foreigner by allowing them to encounter a name that is a bit easier for them to pronounce.
That's
right?
the whole point about branding in a way. In essence, you know, we're all like the brands want to be as approachable as possible. Like, you know, like if we look at McDonald's, it's like people talk about the golden arches.
The golden
which
arches.
is like gold, that's like associated with like wealth and rich, which is contrary to the cheap prices of McDonald's food, but we have this association, and that's like, you know, they have the Happy Meal, and it's like you have this like feeling, like even as like grown ass man, I like look at McDonald's, I'm like, don't eat it all the time, and like, you know, I'm not a fan of it, but like on the odd occasion you're like, it's got soft space in my heart, you know, as a kid, like I'd go get some McNuggets, and it's like, but that association there, it's like it's appealing, and you're trying to like open up this connection, because just as you'd mentioned just a second ago, that brand, it's like there's a feeling there.
Yeah,
when
it's
you see
selling on emotion, isn't it?
Absolutely,
like, because we're emotional creatures.
Yeah.
I mean, the McDonald's for me, as for yourself, is full on, even though I know how horrible the ingredients might be.
Oh, yeah.
It's full on my childhood sort of, you know, a little treat. My parents would also they would not allow us to eat it often at all.
No.
So that was something, there was something additionally special about it, right?
Yeah.
And I think, especially as you grow up as an adult, being, you know, earlier in life, encountering that brand as something pleasant, coming back to it is like, oh yeah, it's, you know, it has a special place in my heart.
Absolutely.
Which KFC doesn't, for example, which it could potentially, if my parents used to, you know, used to.
Oh yeah, 100%. But I mean, yeah, there's in terms of like, because it's just a brand, right? The brand, that's where we go into the whole sort of encapsulation of what is a brand, because you like McDonald's, there's that whole joke of like they just pop up everywhere, you know, and there's like, then you've got like, in terms of like branding, you have like the visual identity, so you have like the colors where they use like those two bold ones, because imagine it was black and white, you go to McDonald's and it'd be like, if the whole like unit was black and white, you'd be like, this is like lifeless and like full of color. Like, I mean, it's important to have like brands that you can work with monotone, because some applications require you, if you're printing in black and white.
Yeah, right.
So it's good to have a logo that is like high contrasting and not incredibly detailed. That's getting more into sort of like the logo design
that's interesting.
itself.
That's interesting though.
Yeah. But it's there's so many elements, and then others, like there's other points about branding, which like the language they use, and sort of there is a lot of elements that I'm still learning myself. You know, like I'm pretty early on in my career, just starting really doing logo design and sort of branding for like a year and a half now, working for the signage company in Edinburgh, which has really opened my eyes, because we're essentially like, we produce signs, and we're a big print shop, so we have files sent from all sorts of people, from brands that, you know, from like Nike and like Strathberry, like big high street brands that know exactly what they're doing, and they have like the most like and the University of Edinburgh, where they have like 70 pages for just signage, so they have the exact measurements, and then you have people who don't have a logo, didn't really care. They just need something on the side of their van, just so that the council are happy. So I've worked with all sorts of people. So you really get like a perspective on that and understand like, okay, what are the people that have spent probably thousands for their branding? What have they done, and what can we bring? Like, what elements of that can we bring to the smaller people? Because
on a bootstrap budget, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good one actually. I'd like to ask you, what from your perspective, what is the we've had these conversations a little bit, but like, what is the most important thing for you as a creative, especially if you are facing a client that has no clue whatsoever? Let's say there is this guy who just opened a bicycle shop, and needs a logo. What is the most important thing you will try to most important information you will try to extract from them to help them? What's the clue?
Well, I think it's the clue basically is like, okay, you've got a bicycle shop. So a lot of like some, very early designers are like, okay, your logo could be a bike or it could be a bike wheel. But I think it's always in terms of like logo design, if you're trying to build a visual identity, is going back. What steps did that person take to open their bike shop? What's the location, right? Are they just opening one bike shop? Are they opening multiple? Like, where is it? Because then you can draw aspects of the history and sort of, because it's always like this person's opened a bike shop, but maybe it's like by the sea or something. And so there's like, so it's specifically, there's more like nuances other than, or maybe he just sells bikes. But I always think it's interesting to sort of delve into a bit of the history of the person that's opening that shop. Okay. To be like, okay, where have they come from? What is their story? Because essentially you're telling a story in the logo and marrying two things, because maybe you don't even use a bike at all for that logo. And that's something that like resonates with them.
Yeah. What makes them unique, I guess, right?
Exactly.
That's
100%. Yeah.
One quote that I think, I don't know if I've recently not told it on the podcast already. I've recently heard this quote by Plato that those that tell stories rule society. And in terms of in general politics or leadership, stories play a huge role. But in general, stories play a huge role. Like we're constantly telling stories. Right now we're telling a story.
Yeah, exactly. It's
every other, we just went for a walk a moment ago. It was a bunch of stories, right?
Yeah.
Maybe some reflections about those stories, but for us to understand someone's predicament, we need to tell the story.
Exactly.
Hear their story.
Yeah.
So the one thing that, like, for example, with with the rebranding we've done, I sort of, you had a little bit of a background about me.
Yeah.
When I gave you the first initial thoughts and brief, what did you find to be most useful to work with? Like, I remember we talked about the intention behind, and maybe I can share that in a second, but like, what have you found, or at which point you were like, okay, now I know what I'm supposed to be doing, as, you helping me create this brand?
Yeah. So I think for me, because I'm really, really early on, I think, in my design career, and I think a massive thing for graphic designers are like, there's a lot of different names, and I'm still trying to figure out where exactly I sit in, because people use like, I'll make like I'm a brand designer, or like all these different phrases, and I think I have no idea what I'd class myself as exactly. I would say at the moment sort of graphic designer / logo designer / visual identity, because essentially you would come to me and you came to me with the concept, I'm going to rebrand, I'm going from this name to this name, and I was like, okay, that's an interesting transition. What are you wanting to change here? Because essentially when it comes to like when you're rebranding versus starting up a new business, you already have something established. So there's a change there. There's a transition that you're wanting to represent. You're going from like this people, and they're going from this like sort of visual identity to this one. What is the purpose of that? Because if you were happy with where it was, you wouldn't have, you just would have left it. You would have kept going. It would have kept growing. But I think you came to me, you're like, okay, this is picking up. I want to reach like a broader audience, and I feel like I want this to represent me more.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, what should we go for that? So then I asked you about things that you liked, like as easy as what colors would you like to introduce, and like what things, because there's some important things like for branding that you have like nailed and established, because that's like the first eye-catching thing, like logo, and you have the different logo variations. So I basically sat down, we had a conversation, I wrote up this brief of like the things that you found interesting, or like the sort of colors and what you didn't like about your last brand and what you sort of wanted to introduce. You had already, for the podcast specifically, because that was sort of the focal point at the beginning, was I want to rebrand my podcast, because that's the thing that I'm you're constantly updating. I was like, okay, well, and the brief slightly changed when we were like, oh, well, there's also like WS Creative Works, and then I was like, well, for this it's important to establish kind of like a hierarchy. So we have WS Creative Works, which is the overarching, because you have your books and you have such, but that's not your podcast.
Yeah.
So how do we connect these things together, right? Because as we say, we're telling a story here. We're telling your overarching, your person is at the top, because you are doing all these other things, and then the podcast is one part of that.
Yeah.
But in a way to sort of future proof it, I guess, we're like, well, we're setting this up in my mind as well. We want to have a visual style that we can expand out over the course of however long. If you're wanting to branch out and do other things, there's room for that. So we talked about the colors, the sort of like typefaces, and you were like, I want it to be like the classic feeling of it.
Yeah, I kept pushing back.
You did, because there was a few like revisions, I remember, because like I'd done some editing on the photo, and that was nailed pretty quickly. But in terms of like the look and feel of the podcast, I think even though we had this sort of the overarching brand, we wanted to look at the approachability of the podcast at first. And I'd gone in quite a different direction, I think, and I'd sent it back to you, and we were like, okay, this isn't it. And in a way, that's a fantastic step, because you looked at it and you were like, that's not it. So I was like, okay, this is nothing like you wanted it to look.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point as well. Like, you gotta know what you don't want
exactly
to know what you want, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably easier to chip off the things you don't want. Rather, it's quite hard to straight away say like, oh, that's.
Yeah. And I'm finding my process as well. Like, I think there's a lot of designers sometimes, like even big agencies, they'll give like, some people give like 100 options in the first like instance, and I think that's overwhelming, because I'm like, then you'll want to pick like 20 or something, and then it's like, well, I don't feel like you should be shoehorning that in. I think there's the steps you can take before that align us properly, to then so that I can go away and create. It's less efficient as well,
I feel.
I think so, yeah. Like you're using a lot of resources, and then I feel like in a way it says, oh yeah, well, I don't know exactly what, I don't think this is lining up properly. Here's just like a lot of different minor changes that it's like, which, I think there's value in that. But I think we spent a lot of time talking. I then went away because you came to me, because I have there's work that I do things in a certain way, and other people do things in a certain way, and I then I took the information you'd given me, I tried to take in as much information as possible so that I can then go away, do what I do, sketches, and then propose like a design. And then obviously we had that first revision, which was in quite a different direction. Like, well, I like sort of like the way the color looked here, but it's too soft and bouncy. And I remember I'd sent that to you. I looked back at my design file, and I actually had a note under it before I sent it to you, and I was like, is this too soft and bouncy? And it was like basically exactly what you said. I was like, okay, I should have maybe sat back but I want to give you the option just to see like your thoughts, in case you were like, oh no, that's exactly what I wanted. But we ended up going away, and we had another chat, and you gave me like a list of like keywords, basically like feelings that you want to incorporate into the new design, which was very important. I think that was kind of the tipping point for it in a way, because then we went away, and I went when we introduced, whereas before it was kind of like the sort of softer, rounder font, because you wanted to incorporate.
I think
your
it
initials.
was, yeah, but
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
I think in particular that round and soft vibe was because what I've shared with you from other podcasts. There was one in particular which, like I've shared with you guys, the it's a great show by Stephen Bartlett,
Yeah.
Diary of a CEO. And I remember in particular that I sort of pointed to it being like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe it's not as similar as one would think,
Sure.
but in terms of the bounciness and especially the roundiness of it, I think that one was
Yeah, because that was another important part of the process as well. The colors that you wanted, the font, but also, you know, in the world out there, we all have competitors. We're all like going up against, like when you're you want to do a
Yeah.
podcast. Okay, sure, there's hundreds of other podcasts out there, so why should people come to you?
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we're trying to like marry up, because you're unique. We're all unique, and it's like, okay, how do we sort of show that uniqueness in a way that brings people to you to then sort of get them listening and such.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point, right? The one interesting thing that you've introduced, and you guys can check it out on the logo, is because of my colorful T-shirt, the sort of tie-dye T-shirt that I've grown to love, and it was on that first photo as well. You introduced this little pattern in the background that was sort of reflective of that, and this is this idea that you shared earlier that what I find particularly challenging about this as a process, rebranding, in my opinion, is more difficult than starting from scratch, because what is there that you're gonna keep, and what is that you're gonna lose, and what is the risk of it, right? If I were to rebrand so much so that there would be nothing, no colors, no patterns, no contrasts, no shapes. Similar, no words, similar to the initial, then I'm basically risking first of all that people will just not recognize it as the continuation, and also that I will lose that initial whatever it was.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there is a certain unusual story stood for something. Well, now I created a brand that looks like Kellogg's.
You're still this. It's this similar podcast. You're pushing it more, and it's like, well, if you make it look like completely different, if people would then sort of see it and like, well, you're attracting a different audience. You're going in a completely different direction. However, as we said, you're moving in a similar direction, but
you just want to hone in on some and make it easier, but keep it. That was your in I remember that being your, sort of insight or whatever, that you've added that pattern, and that's really, really cool, because ultimately the colorful part of the logo obviously had to change. That other logo was, there was too many colors.
I think I think an important thing for this rebrand was that, for your thumbnail, and you had also mentioned this, that there was like the text on it, you had the vortex landscape and unusual stories, but it was really small, so that
you could not see on a thumbnail.
It wasn't really scalable, and that's a massive thing for like branding nowadays, is that you need to use like a logo on like a social media icon that's that big. You also might have it like on like a bookend, but then you also might have it blown up on a billboard. Like you need to, like, it's like about future proofing and making it so that you can have it adaptive for these different spaces, like a website, but you can still, like, at a glimpse, you're like, that's what that brand is. It's on the side of a car that's like flying down the street, and you're like, that was that, and it's all recognizable. And it's like, how can you make that as familiar as possible? Let's see, people see it at first glance and like, oh, that's what that is. How do you communicate that in like a symbol? And I think it was that sort of the marrying up of those two. I think there was an elegance that you had in your initial brand as well, because you had the Creative Works logo, and you had your podcast, which sort of felt separated.
Oh yeah, they
But-
definitely were. Like
Yeah.
the creative works, ultimately, I think that in general,
Yeah.
we've drawn much more on the creative works than on the podcast
Sure.
into this new
Yeah.
look.
Yeah.
From the podcast, there is obviously the colors and the pattern.
Which I think is a lot more playful because, you know,
Yeah.
there's two very distinct elements about your personality, which I think we were trying to combine, which
Yeah,
is that,
yeah.
you know, the creative works, you know, you're writing books, you know, I think that's a serious feat. I think that's very respectable, but it takes serious dedication and to be able to write, and, you know, it's a big thing. And then there's also sort of, but the podcast side, I think, has more of a intrinsically sort of playful
Yeah.
feeling to it, you know, which
A
I think
light-hearted.
yeah,
one, for
exactly.
sure.
And I think
Less demanding.
the initial podcast thumbnail definitely portrayed that, but it maybe wasn't as clear as your Creative Works logo. So we were like, how do we make those two things work together? And I think, as you said, you know, I you know, your tie-dye t-shirt is iconic, and I think it was a very nice feature of your initial logo. And if people ever, you know, see you in person, you know, high chance you may very well be wearing it, you know. But
At a
I think-
party these days.
I think it says a lot. So I think incorporating that onto the thumbnail, it meant that we were bringing that element of your playfulness to the podcast and showing that at the forefront, even though like we were you know, you're not wearing the t-shirt necessarily, because it was a bit more plain. So it's like, it's your face, but also sort of placing that behind you, so it sort of drew people in a little
Yeah.
bit, you know.
You know, I remember for me the challenging part, and also interesting really, but like you know, it's usually the challenge that interests us, was what will the name stand for now, because it's a WS podcast, right? So I could just say it's Wojciech Salski podcast, or Watch Salski podcast, or Wojtek Salski podcast.
Yeah.
And I remember we were on a bus with Julia going to botanical gardens, and I just had this thought of like, well, what could, you know, I was coming up with ideas, what could this stand for? And this is not set in stone, which I think is in particularly amazing about this logo idea and this brand, because I can now say it's Wisdom Seeker, which seems to resonate the most with what the show and what I aspire to be.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, I'm here as a guy constantly learning about new things, and
Yeah.
one of the ideas behind the podcast was like, there are a lot of interesting things I'm encountering and people don't read enough. Let me share with them what I've learned.
Yeah.
And whatever people want to take from it, that's great. Whatever they want to discard, that's fine. For me, then it's all about looking for and seeking that knowledge, not necessarily being the wise sage, as someone suggested at some point.
Oh yeah,
In
of course,
50
the
years,
WS.
maybe.
But you're
50
encouraging
years.
people to come along this journey as well.
Yeah,
like you're,
exactly.
you're on yours, and you feel like people should it's giving them a chance to sort of be like, oh no, this is a thing that you can do yourself, you know.
Yeah.
And that you're at the point where you're also willing to share, which I think it was funny when I heard wise sage, 'cause I'm like, well, in an essence, that's kind of what, you know, what sages do. They share their journey because they're confident enough that they, you know, that there's value in it, you know, as like that's what teachers are, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah,
but so it's adaptable, and it's versatile.
Yeah,
which I think is
exactly,
fun.
and that's amazing. You know, I think if anything, that's probably the biggest feat we've done with that. You know,
the rebrander.
yeah, because Unusual Stories was at some point I realized was restricting me, especially when I was encountering new people to discuss with, and I'm pretty sure, you know, the vision for this show going forward is for it only to grow. So there will be more episodes about books, more episodes about thoughts, and more episodes with people talking.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that in the future there will be also a studio that I have, rather than, you know, trying to make shift with what we have. Everyone starts from somewhere, and having Unusual Stories a couple of times, trying to even, and this is a really good thing that I think many leaders and people of success in commercial, you know, success would say straight away. Simon Sinek is very, I know him for that, is like, you need to be able to explain your idea within like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
If not, you're basically missing the point. If your idea is not explainable to a 5-year-old in the 30 seconds time, then you're missing a lot of the audience these days who are looking for a quick fix.
Yeah.
And no one cares about you anyway. So you kind of have to make it brief and to the point.
Big time, yeah.
And unusual stories, as much as I love that concept, and I always will, and for me it resonates, the backside of my book sort of conveys what I meant by the unusual stories, basically, perfectly.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, it's not intuitive enough for people to resonate straight away.
Yeah.
So they don't know what the podcast is about.
Yeah. Inherently unusual stories has a bit of sort of ambiguous feeling to it.
Exactly.
You know,
right.
I think there were, in the first, like when you first had it, it was really nice because it was like, yeah, well, it is a bit sort of, it's a bit odd, but it's, you know, it's just a reflection of sort of my intake of the world. But now it's like, okay, people need something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And it's like you as their guide almost, as their host, and it is your name, but it sort of involves. The WS is your initials, but it's also the wisdom seekers, and that it sort of involves everyone around the podcast and the listening to it.
And you know, the funny little thing that I did not consider when I was setting up, and this is yet again just my ignorance of starting out, no one Googles anything starting with brackets.
Oh yeah, they don't have to go an extra layer on their keyboard.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so not intuitive. And so if you try it right now, you know, if you look up unusual stories without brackets, you're unlikely to find any trace of you know, there will be some other unusual stories.
Yeah.
Unusual story as a word is probably not so uncommon.
Yeah.
But because of that, even I encountered this very early on, and I remember having a thought sometime around 2022 of like, I shot myself in the foot because of this name. But then it's like, well, all right, let it simmer. Let us not be hasty.
Yeah.
But especially right now with the WS being the name, it's so much easier to even for me to just say to a person. And one thing that I also wanted to say in terms of that unusual stories ambiguity, as you pointed, which is a really good word for it, is like when I invite someone to join me on the show, I need to sell them the idea of the show quickly.
Yeah.
And I was unable, or I was struggling to do that efficiently back then. I don't know if right now this fixes all the problems, probably not, but because now it's a bit more open, it's a WS show, so if I'm talking with someone who's not particularly interested in stories, I can say, oh yeah, it's just I'm a host, I'm having a podcast, let's have a conversation. Done.
You've given yourself a nice big jacket to grow into, you know, it's like you've given that space so that it has potential to.
It's more accommodating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a lovely thing. So you have the initial. I can explain this very easily, but then over time, you know, there's that space to branch out, which I think was a massive part of this sort of this process. I think was being able to. You were like, okay, I feel like I'm being restricted by unusual stories. I need some breathing room.
Literally, yeah. Literally, at some point, it became you know.
Yeah.
It's still, I resonate with that name deeply, but simply because of the algorithms, simply because of how people look up things.
That name will stay there because it's the name of your first book as well. So it's not like it's gone forever. It's just like it's now that has become like the initial like sort of spark for your journey.
Yeah, the first iteration.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah, 100%. You know, the one thing that I also wanted to touch upon for us is like this outreach thing, right?
Sure.
So this is maybe a bit more specific for shows in particular, but not necessarily because brands have to advertise, right? And we've talked before about this idea of like people encountering, you know, scrolling and being like, oh, okay, I understand that name, I understand the idea, I'll look it up. But also, you know, again and again, I remember especially when we had a conversation to begin with, was like, who are you speaking to? And my understanding of my audience so far is like the majority of them are within the age range of like, probably 20 to 35, 40. That's the majority. It's fairly equal, men and women, and there are many more people listening in the United States than in Europe, but that's because also in the United States the podcasting is just more prevalent.
Sure.
It's they're early adopters, let's say.
Okay.
But the British and the Polish are probably the second biggest groups, and then obviously some other countries. There are plenty of them really, but when I was thinking about how to make this show more appealing was like, yet again, let's simplify it, right? And I wanted to ask you, in terms of your experiences with the at your work, basically, or maybe what were some interesting examples of like either challenging or funky, dodgy, sketchy, people that came around with some ideas that were like, okay, we need to simplify this, like, or the other way around. Maybe someone came in and he's like, oh, I'm selling bikes. It's like, great, tell me the story.
Yeah. So I think because I'm doing sort of a couple things at the moment, because I'm obviously working at like the signage company, and I'm also doing like the
freelance
branding, and I think with the signage company we do like logo designs here and there, but I think I'm a lot more in like getting to in the weeds with the process of how I design logos in my freelance time, just because when I worked for the signage company, like it was probably like, it was my entrance, it was really my gateway. They took a chance on me. I was a newbie designer. I had no professional experience prior to that, so I didn't even, in university I was quite silly. I mean, COVID hit right in the middle, so I mean I didn't do any internships or anything. I was just purely working on university projects or personal projects for myself. So working at this company really opened the door for me, and I was just sort of going along with their process. Now, first and foremost, they make signs and vehicle graphics, so they have, one of the big things that the creative director and I actually most of the time end up doing is trying to convince people to put less on their vehicles. And I think it's a really, and it's a really interesting thing,
what you mean.
because
less details.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I was always wondering like why less, and I'm like, oh, because in the instance of vehicle graphics, these things are driving by. They're literally, you're walking down the street, and sure, it's a big advert for your company because it's driving down the street, and you'll see it for like maybe a few seconds. Sometimes, they'll be parked around, but you really want your name, like your logo or like your brand, like easily identifiable aspects of your visual identity, and maybe like your phone number and email if you're like local businesses benefit from having that, because then they'll just phone up. They'll be like, oh, joiner, phone up the joiner straight away, see if you can get a job. But it was really interesting, and it took me a while to like sink in, because I was like, well, I could do like all these funky graphics, but then there's also the cost element to it, right? For graphic, or those specifically, but I could talk about those for ages. But in terms of branding and it sort of being challenging, there has been there's clients. It's I feel like in the design world, it's a lot of, it feels like it's trying to convince, or not. No, that's not correct.
You convincing the client, or the client convincing the audience?
It's a bit of both. Yeah, because the client obviously, or the customer, like they've got their business, so they know who the people that they're trying to like, they're trying to reach out to.
Yeah.
And, you're like, okay, well, you're almost at their mercy, because you're like, well, I'm trying to make something that you think believes marries those two things, but then visually they'd be like, no, I want this color, or I want to incorporate this, and I think I was speaking until an idea or an example came into my head. There was one particular one where it was a toy shop in Edinburgh, and they've been around for years. Like my auntie brought her kids, or like my cousins when they were kids there, so they've been around for a long time, and so it was quite like an honor to redesign their storefront, and I was working
I
with
know which
with
one.
a customer. Yeah, and I was and we were back and forth about colors, and I was like, I proposed like a bunch of different ideas, and it came to the point where we're kind of going with this idea of, you know, toy blocks, or like these like sort of the letters are in individual shapes as if they're blocks, which, you know, for a toy shop, that's, you know, it's quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, there was sort of this debacle about colors and what colors we should use, and he was very adamant that he wanted to use lots of colors, and I was like, okay, fair enough, you know. And I did an option with colors, but typically when it comes to like logos and stuff, less is more. You know, that's that whole
Yeah.
conversation that comes back, is that, you know, if you keep adding more, and it actually can be a bit overwhelming, and, you know, visually you don't know what you're sort of looking at. And they were very keen to add, and I gave them an option which I was like, okay, well, I'm limiting the color palette to 4 for my option, because I feel like it's easier to digest,
Yeah.
and you see it quicker. We ended up going, you know, but, you know, the idea where the client, they wanted more colors. So I was like, oh, we were like, well, okay, that's what they want. So we produced it, and I like it. You know, it looks nice, but
It's sort of against what the you know, the
sort of like color theory
guidebook would
in a
say.
way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly that. Of
course.
Yeah, but, you know, at the end of the day, like it's you're creating what they feel like is right as well. But it is
Yeah.
a bit of our job to be like, okay, yeah, this might be that, and but also you don't want to tell they're. It's not like they're wrong, right? Because sure, like rules are like can be bent and such, and I think that's kind of what I'm exploring, or like trying to like figure out like where's the balancing point of those two things of like, well, I know what should look. I feel like I know what. Not to say that what I think looks good is the best thing ever, because I definitely know, you know, I look for the back of my designs like even a year or two ago, and I'm like, I think that was good.
It's a matter of taste as well,
yeah,
right? Like,
for sure,
and,
yeah.
and the yeah, no,
Yeah.
the check on your notebook if there was anything else we wanted to share before we wrap it up. But
Yeah.
the one thing that popped up for me as well, which I wanted to share with you guys, and just maybe praise the perspective from Trenton, was the I didn't realize how complex the logo and branding thing is. I did study it a little bit, and I had like marketing basics, whatever, at uni. I wasn't that particularly interested in that, to be honest. But like when you gave me the brief for it now, so basically the if you guys have any experience about this probably you already know, but I didn't know. Now I have a brief, which is like a PDF, you know, format, kind of a booklet, alongside some files in folders.
The band guidelines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea behind it is like, not only do I have for my own benefit a breakdown of what Trenton produced for me and what we've agreed, what we've, you know, sort of like a post project brief.
Yeah.
But also, in a way, with this, I can now go to any other practitioner, come what it may,
Yeah.
you know. Let's say that I move away, really far away, and I need some project done.
Yeah.
I can go to a practitioner, and as long as they are familiar with, you know, in general, with the practice of creating branding,
Yeah.
they will be able to basically replicate and then build upon it,
Yeah.
without me having to yet again explain everything and go
Yeah.
through all the process. So
Yeah.
it's not. I find that this is actually a great additional benefit that I did not expect to get out of this experience. That not only do I have now a logo and a versatile, you know, brand to put out there,
Yeah.
but I also don't have to have all my notes and
Yeah.
yet again, you know,
Retell them like, oh, this is how this should be done. Like it comes, so we have like the images with the logos and their different formats and like vector, because then you can. I remember mentioning this to you.
Yeah.
Like if, you know, for your next book it was hardback and you wanted like your logo embossed on the side, that there is the files and sort of the direction, and, you know, we've selected like Pantone colors for your brand, which is another massive thing, because those are like the specific inks. So yeah, it's basically like
they're
a
like they can
package.
be used everywhere in the world, right?
Exactly.
Like everyone, yeah.
You basically, like, for whatever you're having done, if it's anything visual, you can just, if you're, you know, you end up going for like a designer who you want to hire to do social media posts for you or
Yeah.
whatever, that you can just bung them this like PDF and all your sort of assets and be like, here's my brand, you can use this, you know, and it sort of has like sort of guidance, you know, it's the logo usage guidelines or the brand guidelines per se, and bigger brands will have bigger documents, you know.
Yeah.
They'll get super nuanced. They'll have like the language that they should use in their posters, if it's like a we instead of an I, or like and things like this, or like even to the punctuation, or like if you're doing like producing a document, some people have, oh, you should have like small capital letters here, or like what fonts we were going to use as well.
That's right, and that's huge, you know. Obviously right now I work for a corporation, and this was one of the first few days workshops we had, which was like a full-on 3 hours of banging again and again, like this is how we, you know, this is how we create a presentation, this is how we save a document
For brand consistency.
brand, this is the word, this is the word we're using, this is our,
it's hard working for a corporation as well, because then it's just like,
but it gives me, you know, obviously right now with the WS creative works and podcast and stuff, obviously this is quite a small adventure at the moment, but who knows where it's going to take us, and it's, I think it's really powerful and empowering for me as a young entrepreneur, let's say, to have a brief that basically sets up the rules, and now I could multiply it by 1,000, and that's still replicable. And I don't have to explain again and again, and I don't have to go back and forth. And most importantly, I know which file is for what. So I don't upload the logo that is, you know,
like a low res
360 pixels.
And then you have it like printed massive, and then it's like pixels the size of your face. Like, that's it's a massive thing.
That's funny. Is there anything else we would like to share with our audience today? Or
I think it pretty much touched all points there, even more than I was realizing. But I think, you know, it's a very exciting adventure, and I'm grateful to be a part of it, and, you know, like visual identity of yourself, because, you know, it's very exciting, and it's something that I love to do, and I think, you know, at the end of the day, being able to sort of make something that you feel is representative and echoes sort of the feeling that you have, you know, for your brand, because it was definitely like, I hadn't done a logo like yours before, like I like where it's a very intricate sort of 2 letters sort of fused together, but they also have like space to sort of breathe between each other, and it was a fascinating process for myself, and there was lots of versions that I ended up doing once we dumped the first idea, where it was just these sort of fat letters, and we're like, okay, no, you were like, we want to use a serif font. There was something, you know, as you mentioned, like this sort of elegance of this classical feeling towards it, and sort of like an ode to books and such, that, you know, and for like reading like that, I think it was, and just sort of the combination of those two, it was very interesting, and it felt like, I remember the moment, because you came round and we sat down, we're like, right, we're nailing this now, because it's just a few tiny changes, a couple tweaks, and I remember it almost felt slightly unprofessional, because I was then in Adobe Illustrator, and you saw like how everything was put together, and you were like, it's messy. It's a messy process. Exactly. But then once you're in wireframes, and you can see all these layers, and then you hit Control Y, and then it's just the flat, like the 2 flat colors, and it's the white logo and the blue, and we're looking at it, and you're like, that's it. That feeling, I was like, okay, we've got it, because then it feels like, you know, that's that connection between you and your identity that then transcends that, and that is what you're pushing out to the people that are connecting to. So if you feel that it's representative of you, then that just sort of carries on through, and there's a word.
It's
for
like
that.
you're feeling you're feeling comfortable with it. You know, for me as well, and this is something that with all those logos. Earlier on, you said about the someone that had like hundreds of logos done at the same time. I truly do believe that decision paralysis is a thing. Like if you have too many options, and
Yeah.
I can see how my girlfriend struggles with just choosing out of a menu.
Oh,
And
I feel that.
you know,
Yeah.
and now on top of that, imagine having 100 tiny differences, logos. I wouldn't want that. I remember from a very early stage, I told you like, please give me like three at a time, three at a time.
Yeah.
And then obviously as we were going forward, we knew what doesn't work, so that it was becoming more limited.
Yeah. Yeah.
But still, three at a time, not only allows me to be more decisive and it makes it easier
Yeah.
to decide,
Yeah.
but also I think it actually enhances the quality of my experience as a customer because I don't compare it to so many others. Which
Sure.
I think, this is a bigger, another kind of worms to open maybe, but I
Yeah.
think in general, in our life these days,
Yeah.
we have too many options and therefore we're less satisfied with them.
Yeah.
Dating pool, food, clothing, whatever you want to,
Yeah.
companies, jobs.
I-
If you
and
had
I-
one job, you would be satisfied with it. Now everyone can have a job all the time and everyone's,
Yeah.
annoyed by it.
Yeah.
So
And I feel like providing you three options, well, it's like they're different directions, but it's something that, there's value in all of them and there's unique directions in each three of them. Whereas if I think you're producing 100 options, it's like, well, there's only just like slight differences between the two and you're creating this scale, right? It
Yeah.
almost becomes like a spectrum. Whereas if you have like three unique ones, you're like, well, I like this one, I like the elements of this one and an element of that one, then we'll like match those two. Whereas if you provide the 100 straight off the bat, you're like, well, that was a lot of time and a lot of effort for something that's probably not that useful.
exactly, and or very little effort,
Yeah.
because I think that's also how a shortcut could be made by the company providing the logo.
Yeah.
Just like, okay guys, well, they don't know what they want, so let's smash out 50 stock logos.
Yeah.
And like we're gonna tell them it took us a week.
Yeah.
It actually took us 2 hours. Whatever.
Yeah.
So you're not as invested. Whereas if you have to create free for me,
Yeah.
yes, you will have more time to spend on them.
Yeah.
And therefore there will be more quality. But also because there is less of them, I will not be, distracted by
Yeah.
a whole. So your work will be actually more appreciated, I think.
Yeah. And I think I can also, it gives, because there's more, I feel like, at least there's a lot of thought that goes into the three of them as opposed to just like bashing out like, not to bash anyone's process. 'Cause,
Cookie cutter.
Totally, like people like, I don't doubt that they spend a lot of time and put their heart and soul into like, these hundreds of options as
Yeah.
well. But I feel like for me at least, and that was a good combination for us as well because that I can then explain the rationale behind these options. And that there's always a purpose behind these decisions, and that we can always like add a little bit here and a little bit there, if and when that's required. But,
Yeah, I think it's for us it worked, and fair play. I bet it does help as well to have a good relationship in those situations, especially if you're going back and forth and whatever. But maybe you're right. For some I bet it worked as well to have 100 copies done.
Yeah. I'm sure that's the case. And
everyone is in their own little process.
I
right?
guess as well, like for me to bash out 100 options right now is, maybe it would be good, but man, I don't know how long that would take me. Because there's all the sketches and such you do, and then you go to digitize them, and I think, the whole, it goes back to the idea of like being able to, if you can't draw the idea on like a tissue paper in a bar somewhere, how good of an idea actually is it? It's like,
You're
sure, there's a
probably
lot of
missing
steps
the point.
behind it, but to get the idea across as elegantly and fast as possible is vital.
All right, before I wrap up, where can people find you? If anyone out there was inspired by today to get a logo sorted, or they want just your opinion on something, what social media or email address, whatever.
You can see my work. Like I now have a website. It's definitely up for the next year. I mean, hopefully it's going to be more than next year. But so it's mynameistrenton.com. So there you go. It's as easy as that.
That's really cool.
I'm also on Instagram, Trenton.McClellan. I have some posts there, but I mostly update, like post the work to my website and stuff, and so there's a contact page if you want to reach out. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to have a chat, and we can design some cool stuff. Make
Exactly.
that, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I'll put the link below for you guys as well, to both of these, so Trenton can get your thoughts, comments, and also if you'd like a logo or a rebrand created. Other than that, guys, as I said, so this is the new normal, I guess. We'll see how it goes. I'm very grateful for your work and also our conversation today. I think that was quite fun.
Oh.
And other than that, guys, have a wonderful, wonderful week. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.